Is marriage equality a concern to you?
Marriage equality. You mean between same-sex couples?
Yes.
In general, yes. This was not a focus of the visit here. It's been a focus in certain other countries that I've looked at. As I said, I have to identify 2 or 3 priority issues of concern. In many countries, I've looked at the rights of LGBTI persons, but this was not something I looked at here. The one thing I would note, though, is that the European standard on this is evolving relatively rapidly, because more than half of all Council of Europe member states now legally recognize same-sex partnerships, which means that the European Court of Human Rights will now give less freedom of maneuver to member states on this issue. And there was a recent judgment of the European Court of Human Rights on this. So the European debate on this is evolving quite quickly, but it was not something I looked at here.
Herr Jung.
You mentioned surveillance. We are essentially living in a surveillance state already. Do you see this as irreversible? Do you think not being subject of surveillance or not being under surveillance is not a human right anymore?
No, I think that it is definitely a human right, and I have intervened in a number of national contexts, including in Germany, to urge greater safeguards on the right to privacy. Because when mass surveillance goes unchecked, it affects not only our right to privacy, it affects confidentiality of journalistic sources, it affects lawyer-client confidentiality, it can affect freedom of assembly and association, and many rights. I think what we've witnessed over the last 10 years or so is ample evidence that democratic oversight of security services doesn't work in Europe or elsewhere. The first sign was the revelations of extraordinary rendition, cooperation by many European agencies with the CIA to abduct people, to keep them in secret prisons, to send them to Guantanamo. Where were the people overseeing the security services at that point? Why didn't they raise the alarm? And the second big incident that showed that oversight doesn't work is the revelations of mass surveillance. Where were the overseers? Where were those protecting our private data? Why did they not raise their voices? So it's clear that there's a legitimate concern on the part of states regarding security, terrorism, and the states have the right, indeed the duty, to protect their populations against terrorists. But they have to do it while upholding human rights and the right to private life. And the best way, in my view, is to beef up, to strengthen, to reinforce democratic oversight of security services. This means giving overseers sufficient budgets, sufficient powers, sufficient technical expertise to keep an eye on what the spies are doing, to understand, to ask tough questions, to have intrusive powers to look at what the security services are doing. And I think that there's a need to reinvigorate this. This is one of the reasons I focused on this issue in Germany, but I've done it not only in Germany, and we've put out broader guidance on what good practice looks like in terms of democratic oversight. So this is not a battle I'm willing to concede yet. I think we have a lot of work to do here.
I want to go back to your point about the NSU. I wonder if German institutions, if German security institutions have learned enough, because after NSU there were no real consequences of the institutional failure. Same with like the CIA torture program, where German officials, German institutions have cooperated with the CIA in capturing people who get tortured afterwards. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that the NSU affair, everybody I met tells me that it was an eye-opener. It was an awareness-raising bomb in people's heads. But I said, well, what followed from this change in consciousness, this change in awareness? And I mentioned the changes that have taken place, but I would like to see more. When I read in the government's response to my report that regarding training of judges and prosecutors, that in 2014 there was a seminar on intercultural competence. I say that's very good, but that's not racism. What are you doing to teach your people about racism? Can't you tell me more about what you're doing? So I would like to see a more sustained effort, especially on the educational front, to address what is clearly an institutional problem that is quite deep and hasn't been fully dealt with yet.
Don't you see the need for institutional change?
Well, this is why one of the reasons I wanted to recommend the creation of an independent police complaints body, because I received many reports of racial profiling by the police. It's clear that the police missed the racist motivation in many of the crimes of the NSU, but not only of the NSU, of others, and that there needs to be not only training but a body to oversee the work of the police. Such bodies exist in other places. They exist in the UK, in Ireland, in Denmark, and I think that some reforms have taken place in the police, but I would like to see more, and I think that the police complaints mechanism would be a good step forward.
I have one final question. All in all, the human rights situation in Germany is not that bad, you seem to say. How do you view the German government working with regimes who give a shit about human rights? Does German foreign policy actually care about human rights?
It's a bit beyond my mandate to comment on German foreign policy. Of course, I want Germany and other countries in the Council of Europe to make sure that all members of the Council of Europe live up to the standards that they've signed up to. And sometimes countries get a relatively easy ride. When the Committee of Ministers, which represents the governments of the Council of Europe, ask me, well, what more can they do to ensure human rights in all the Council of Europe member states, I say, be very strong on the execution of judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. Don't take promises for deeds. And be tough on them. Keep this system alive and functioning by making sure that all member states live up to their standards. And I would like to see Germany, as well as other countries, keep everybody to a very high standard, to hold them to account. And this doesn't always take place for various reasons, for political reasons, for economic reasons, for energy reasons, for security reasons. My job is to say, put human rights first. Don't forget them. Hold everybody to a high standard.